Open road, open night. He gripped the steering wheel. Engine hummed, headlights cut through the darkness. Another night, another drive. The highway stretched before him, a black ribbon against the indigo sky. Stars were faint, obscured by a thin haze. Air hung heavy, thick with the smell of damp earth. Miles ticked by. Loneliness crept in, a familiar companion. He switched on the radio, static greeting him. A shiver ran down his spine. He wasn't alone. Whispers of the wind. He turned up the collar of his jacket. The air had grown colder, biting at exposed skin. Wind howled outside, a mournful sound. Whispers seemed to dance around his car. He tried to ignore it, focusing on the road. Each mile marker felt like a victory. He just needed to get through the night, reach his destination. The radio crackled, a burst of static, then a voice faint and garbled, too low to make out the words. A chill ran down his spine. He wasn't imagining things. Shadows in the rear view. He glanced at the rearview mirror. 2 points of light stared back, another car, far behind. He felt a surge of relief, company at last. He kept driving, but the car behind remained distant. Always the same distance, never closing, never falling behind. A knot of unease formed in his stomach. He checked the rear view again. The car was closer now, headlights brighter. He could have sworn it hadn't seemed to move. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. Static symphony. The radio erupted in a cacophony of noise, static high-pitched and piercing. He slammed his hand down on the volume knob, but the sound persisted. It filled the car, vibrating in his teeth. He tried to focus on the road, but the noise was overwhelming. His heart hammered in his chest. He felt a surge of panic. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Then as quickly as it started, the noise stopped. Silence descended, heavy and absolute. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. He glanced at the rearview mirror. The car was gone, vanished. The hitchhiker. He slowed down, pulling onto the shoulder. He needed to clear his head, get a grip. This was madness. He was letting his imagination run wild. As he came to a stop, he noticed a figure standing by the side of the road, a woman, shrouded in shadows. She was waving her arms, trying to flag him down. He hesitated for a moment, then pulled over. He couldn't leave her stranded out here. Not in this weather, not on this road. He rolled down the window. Vanishing act. On a night where the fog hung low and the air was thick with an unsettling silence, the road seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. "Need a lift?" he asked, his voice cutting through the stillness like a knife. The figure in the shadows hesitated for a moment, then moved closer. The woman nodded, her face hidden in the darkness, her hair blowing wildly in the wind. There was something almost ethereal about her presence, as if she were a part of the night itself. He reached over and unlocked the passenger door, the click of the lock echoing in the quiet night. The door creaked open, inviting her into the warmth of the car. She slid into the seat, bringing with her a gust of cold air and the smell of damp earth. The mist seemed to follow her, swirling around her feet before dissipating into the car's interior. He started the engine, the headlights cutting through the fog as he pulled back onto the road. The tension in the air was palpable, each moment stretching into an eternity. He glanced at his passenger, trying to get a better look at her, but she was gone. The seat was empty, as if she had never been there at all. He slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. His heart pounded in his chest as he looked around frantically. He was alone, the night swallowing him whole. Had she ever been there at all? The question echoed in his mind, the silence of the night offering no answers. His thoughts raced, trying to make sense of what had just happened. He could still smell the damp earth, clinging to the air like a ghostly reminder of her presence. The mist rose from the ground, wrapping around the car in an eerie embrace. The night was alive with mystery, and he was left to wonder if he had just encountered something beyond the realm of the ordinary. Fear's grip. He was losing it. He had to be. He took a deep breath, trying to regain control. He needed to get off this road, find a town, a gas station, anything. He put the car in gear and drove on. His hands were shaking, his heart pounding in his ears. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched, hunted. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end. He glanced at the rearview mirror. 2 points of light stared back at him. The car was back. Lost and alone. He pressed down on the accelerator, the engine roaring in protest. He pushed the car faster, desperate to escape. But the car behind kept pace, its headlights growing brighter. He glanced at the road signs. He had no idea where he was. He was lost. Hopelessly lost. And he had the sinking feeling that he was running out of time. The car behind him flashed its high beams. The light was blinding. He cried out, shielding his eyes. When he could see again, the road was gone. He was heading straight for a wall of trees. Glowing eyes. He slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car smashed into the trees, the windshield shattering. He blacked out. When he came to, he was hanging upside down, suspended by his seatbelt. The car was on its side, the engine sputtering. He could smell gasoline. He fumbled for his seatbelt, his heart racing. He had to get out of here. Now! As he struggled to free himself, he heard a noise outside. A low growl. Then he saw them. Two glowing eyes, peering through the shattered windshield. Face of horror. The night was thick with an unsettling silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves and distant howls. The road stretched endlessly, shrouded in darkness as if it led straight into the abyss. He screamed, a primal sound of fear that echoed through the night. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a reminder of his fragile mortality. The terror in his eyes was palpable, a reflection of the unimaginable horror he faced. The creature outside hissed, its breath fogging up the glass. It was a sound that sent shivers down his spine, a reminder that he was not alone. The fog on the window grew thicker, obscuring his view, but he could still sense the malevolent presence lurking just beyond. He could see its face now, pressed against the windshield. It was inhuman, grotesque, a nightmarish visage that defied all logic and reason. Its eyes glowed with a sinister light, and its twisted features seemed to mock his fear. A nightmare brought to life. The world around him seemed to warp and twist, as if reality itself was bending under the weight of the horror. Shadows danced menacingly, and the air grew thick with an oppressive sense of dread. He tore at his seatbelt, his fingers slick with blood. Panic surged through him as he struggled to free himself, each movement a desperate bid for survival. The metallic taste of fear lingered in his mouth, and his breaths came in ragged gasps. He had to get out of here. The car felt like a coffin, and the walls seemed to close in on him. Every second counted, and he knew that staying meant certain death. His mind raced, searching for a way out, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. He wouldn't let this thing take him. He wouldn't die here. Not like this. Determination flared within him, a burning resolve to fight against the encroaching terror. He clenched his jaw, steeling himself for the battle ahead. With a final desperate tug, he was free. The seatbelt gave way, and he felt a surge of relief. But the danger was far from over. He knew he had to move quickly, to put as much distance between himself and the creature as possible. He fell to the roof of the car, ignoring the pain shooting through his shoulder. The impact was jarring, but he couldn't afford to stop. Pain was a small price to pay for survival. He gritted his teeth and pushed himself forward. He kicked out the remaining shards of glass and scrambled out of the wreckage. The night air was cold against his skin, but it was a welcome contrast to the suffocating heat of the car. He stumbled, his legs weak from the ordeal, but he forced himself to keep moving. The creature's hiss echoed in his ears, a haunting reminder that the nightmare was far from over. But he was alive, and as long as he drew breath, he would fight to stay that way. Eternal silence. He didn't waste time looking back. He ran. The night was thick with an oppressive darkness, the kind that seemed to swallow all light and hope. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat a desperate plea for survival. He ran through the trees, branches whipping at his face. The forest was a labyrinth of shadows and unseen dangers, each step a gamble. The branches seemed to reach out like skeletal hands, clawing at his skin, leaving stinging welts. He didn't know where he was going, but he didn't care. The only thing that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between him and the creature. His mind raced with fragmented thoughts, memories of a life that now seemed so distant. He just had to get away. The fog thickened, wrapping around him like a shroud, making it even harder to see. Every sound was amplified, the crunch of leaves underfoot, the snap of twigs, and the relentless pursuit behind him. He could hear the creature behind him crashing through the undergrowth. It was relentless, a force of nature that seemed to grow stronger with every step he took. The sound of its pursuit was a constant reminder of the danger he was in. Its growls echoed through the trees, closer with every passing second. The growls were guttural, primal, sending shivers down his spine. He could almost feel its hot breath on his neck, the anticipation of its claws sinking into his flesh. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning. Each breath was a struggle, his body screaming for rest, but he couldn't stop. Stopping meant death. He could feel the lactic acid building in his muscles, each step becoming more labored. He burst out of the trees and into a clearing. The sudden openness was disorienting, the moonlight casting eerie shadows on the ground. For a moment he felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly extinguished. He looked around frantically for help, for escape, but there was nothing. He was alone. The clearing was a cruel joke, a false promise of safety. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of salvation, but there was none, and the creature was closing in. He could see its shadow moving closer, a dark specter of doom. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. There was no escape. The end was inevitable. He closed his eyes and waited for the end. The silence was deafening. In that moment, time seemed to stretch, each second an eternity. The forest, once alive with the sounds of his desperate flight, fell eerily quiet. The only sound was his own ragged breathing, a stark contrast to the impending doom. He braced himself, every muscle tensed, as he awaited the inevitable.